You know that person? They pull up in the same Hilux they have been driving since 2014. The sun has faded the paint along the bonnet. There is a small dent on the rear passenger door that has a story behind it. Nobody asks about anymore. The aircon takes a few minutes to get going in summer. They know exactly which way to angle the key to get it started first go. Meanwhile, everyone around them has upgraded. New Ranger every 3 years, new RAV4, new screen, new sensors, new monthly repayment quietly bleeding out of the account. And every time someone sees the old ute sitting in the driveway, they ask the same question: why don't you just get a new one? What is interesting is that a lot of these people actually could. They just do not want to. And the reason usually has very little to do with the car. Australia has a particular relationship with cars. In a country this size, with public transport that works brilliantly in about 4 postcodes nationally, the car is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. It is how people get to work, get the kids to school, get to the hardware store, get out of the city on a long weekend when the walls start closing in. But somewhere along the way, the car became something else too. It became a signal, a way of communicating to the street, to the neighbors, to the school car park, that things are going well, that you are keeping up. The automotive industry understands this better than almost any other sector. The entire financing model, the 7-year loan, the balloon payment, the dealer who talks in weekly repayments rather than total cost, is built around making the upgrade feel not just affordable, but responsible. Sensible, even. You deserve a reliable car, they say, as if the one sitting in your driveway with 180,000 kilometers on it and a fresh service is somehow letting the family down. Advertising works by creating discomfort with what you already own. Not because the old thing stopped working, because contentment is bad for business. The numbers on car ownership in Australia are confronting if you actually stop to look at them. The average new car in Australia now costs around $50,000. Finance it over 7 years, and the weekly repayment is in the ballpark of $180 to $220, depending on the rate. Add comprehensive insurance, registration, fuel, and servicing, and the total weekly cost of a new car for the average Australian sits somewhere between $350 and $450. That is $18,000 to $23,000 a year after tax. The person driving the same 10-year-old Camry or Triton or Forester, owned outright, is spending a fraction of that. Registration, insurance on an older vehicle, fuel, and a service once a year. Maybe $7,000 to $9,000 annually, depending on what comes up. The gap between those two numbers, call it $12,000 to $14,000 a year, is not small. Invested consistently into a low-cost index fund over 10 years, that gap compounds into something that changes the shape of a financial life. It does not look like much week to week. Over a decade, it is a deposit. It is a self-funded super top-up. It is options. The person in the old car is not losing. They are quietly winning a game most people around them do not even know is being played. But this is not really a finance video, because for most Australians who keep the same car for a decade, the decision is not primarily financial. It runs deeper than that. Psychologists have studied what is called the mere exposure effect for decades. The more familiar something becomes, the more positively we feel toward it. Not because the object improves, because familiarity itself creates a form of emotional safety that humans find genuinely comforting, particularly during periods of stress and uncertainty. Australia has had a lot of uncertainty in the past decade. Cost of living pressure, interest rate movements, global instability. The human brain was not designed for the pace of modern change, and it naturally seeks anchors, familiar routines, familiar environments, familiar objects. That old car was there for all of it. The interstate move, the relationship that ended, the job that worked out, the weekend trip to the coast where everyone slept in the back on the way home and nobody complained. It sat in the driveway through all the versions of a life that no longer exist in quite the same form. Researchers studying autobiographical memory have found that physical objects become emotional storage systems. We attach our stories to things without realizing it, which means when someone finally trades in a car they have owned for 10 years, The emotion they feel is not really about the car. It is about the years the car was present for. They are not losing a vehicle. They are closing a chapter. Most people around them see old metal. The owner sees something else entirely. There's also something happening culturally that the 10-year car crowd seem to have figured out ahead of schedule. Social media turned ordinary Australian life into a performance. Holidays, renovations, purchases, celebrations, everything became visible, shareable, and quietly competitive. And cars sat right in the middle of it. What you drive says something about you now in a way it perhaps did not a generation ago. But some people eventually get exhausted by the performance, exhausted by upgrading because everyone else is upgrading, exhausted by the subtle anxiety of wondering whether what they have is still impressive enough. And something shifts when a person stops needing external validation from what they own. They become much harder to sell to, much calmer in the way they move through the world. The research on materialism is consistent here. Lower attachment to status-based possessions correlates with lower social comparison anxiety and higher reported well-being over time. Because that comparison has no finish line, there will always be a newer model, a shinier color, a more impressive badge sitting in the next driveway. The person who keeps the same car for 10 years quietly exits that race. And perhaps that is why they attract commentary from people still running it, because they represent a freedom that is harder to achieve than it looks. There is one more layer worth naming. Decision fatigue is real, and modern Australian life is relentless for it. Between work, kids, mortgages, interest rates, school terms, health insurance reviews, energy bills, and everything else demanding mental energy daily, the brain gets tired, genuinely tired. And what happens as people get older is that they start optimizing for peace rather than stimulation. Same coffee order, same route to work, same car. Not because ambition left, because after enough years of noise, the things that require no relearning become genuinely precious. There is no new technology to figure out, no new payment to absorb, no anxiety about the first scratch on fresh paint. The old car just fits, like a favorite pair of boots that have taken the shape of your foot, comfortable in a way that new things, by definition, cannot be. Modern culture reads this as stagnation. Psychologically, it is often the opposite. Choosing simplicity in a world that profits from your dissatisfaction requires a particular kind of confidence. It means being comfortable disappointing the expectations of people who were never that invested in your life to begin with. To most people, it is just an old car sitting in a driveway. To the person driving it, it is paid off. It is familiar. It is reliable in the way that only things you have had long enough to fully understand can be. It is $14,000 a year that went somewhere better. It is proof that they stopped needing every stranger at the servo to be impressed by what they drive. In a country that is currently doing it financially tough, where household budgets are stretched and the pressure to keep up is louder than ever, the Australian who looks at their decade-old car and thinks, yeah, that'll do, might be the most quietly rational person on the street. They have already figured out something that a lot of people are still spending money trying to discover. Enough is enough. How long have you had your car? And honestly, would you ever want to replace it? Drop it in the comments. And if this one got you thinking, hit the like button and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.